3 scary true security guard horror story. Haunted guard, true story. About 15 years ago, I worked as a night guard at a pastry manufacturing plant on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a big place, but it was old. The kind of building that had seen better decades. During the day, it smelled of sugar, butter, and fresh bread. But when night fell and the last of the workers went home, that sweetness turned stale. The air felt heavier, colder. Every corner creaked, every shadow seemed alive. The plant was surrounded by a bad neighborhood, run-down warehouses, broken street lights, and stray dogs that barked at nothing. My shift started at 7 p.m. and ended at sunrise. I was alone for most of it. No one wanted the night shift. It paid slightly more, but the silence, the loneliness, and the cold would make most people quit within weeks. My usual routine was simple. Every hour I made a full round through the plant, from the front gate to the loading docks, then through the production floor where the big machines stood like sleeping giants. Their shapes were eerie in the dark, like frozen beasts caught mid-movement. Above the main floor ran a narrow metal catwalk that led up to a few small offices. The only way up was a long staircase protected by a metal cage with a gate that I alone had the key to. I never liked that staircase. It groaned under my boots and echoed through the empty factory. It felt like the kind of place where sound went to die. On one wall near the catwalk were 5 hooks, and 3 white lab coats usually hung there. The workers left them after their shifts. I never paid much attention to them, until one particular night. That night started like any other. I arrived just before 7, signed in and checked the cameras. Everything was quiet. Around 8 o'clock, I began my first round. I passed the coat rack, the 3 coats still hanging neatly on the first 3 hooks. Nothing unusual. I climbed up the stairs, unlocked the gate, checked the offices, turned off any lights left on, then locked the gate again on my way down. It was a routine I'd done hundreds of times. But when I came back an hour later, something was off. One of the coats had moved. It had been hanging on the middle hook before, but now it was on the far right. I stopped mid-step and stared at it. My first thought was that maybe one of the supervisors had returned to grab something from the office. But all the lights were off up there and I hadn't heard a single footstep. Still, I convinced myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe I just remembered it wrong. Maybe I was tired. I unlocked the gate, climbed up, checked the offices again. Nothing. Every room was empty. The air was cold and still. I stood for a moment on the catwalk, looking down at the factory floor. The rows of silent machines stretched into darkness, their metal frames glinting faintly under the weak emergency lights. I felt like I was standing inside a giant metal skeleton. I locked the gate behind me and went back to the break room, trying to shake off the unease. By 10 o'clock, I made my next round. This time, I froze before I even reached the stairs. The coats were different again. Each one hung on an alternating hook, like someone had been moving them back and forth between my rounds. I felt my stomach twist. Someone was in the building. I walked the floor with my flashlight, every step echoing off the concrete. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" But my voice only bounced back at me. The air felt heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I checked every door, all locked tight. alarm still armed. I climbed back up the stairs. The gate was locked exactly as I left it, no signs of anyone forcing it. I opened it anyway, checked the offices again. Empty. The desks were neat, papers stacked. I even opened the closet doors and checked behind the furniture. Nothing. When I came back down, the coats were still in their new positions. At that point, I wasn't scared. Not yet, just annoyed. I thought maybe one of the employees had a key copy and was playing a prank. But as the night went on, things got worse. Each time I made my round, something had changed. One time the coats were all on one side. The next they were spaced evenly apart. Another time, one coat was missing entirely, only to reappear on the next round. By midnight, I was done pretending this was normal. I locked myself in the lounge, sat in front of the security monitors, and watched every camera feed I had access to. Most of the cameras were old, black and white, with static flickering across them. But I could still see the staircase clearly. For the first hour, nothing. Just the quiet hum of the old monitors. Then, around 1:15 a.m., something flickered in the corner of the screen. A shape, just for a second, moving along the catwalk. I leaned closer. It was faint, like a blur of white, gone before I could focus. I rewound the footage. The shape didn't show again. It was there one frame, gone the next. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch. The cameras were ancient. They glitched all the time. But I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that I wasn't alone. By 2 a.m., I was too uneasy to sit still. I grabbed my flashlight and forced myself back onto the floor. The factory was colder than before, my breath visible in the beam of light. I walked slowly toward the staircase, my footsteps echoing far too loud. When I reached the coats, my heart stopped. All three were hanging perfectly still, except for one. The one on the far hook swayed gently, as if someone had just brushed past it. There was no draft, no open door, just that soft, silent movement. I stood there for almost a full minute, frozen. Then, with a shaky breath, I reached out and stopped it with my hand. The fabric was icy cold. I climbed the stairs again. The gate creaked open, and I immediately noticed something different. The smell. A faint, sickly sweet odor, like burnt sugar and something rotten. It wasn't there before. The offices were dark, but I could see the faint outlines of the desks. I moved slowly, scanning the corners with my flashlight. Nothing. Then, behind me, clang. It came from the staircase. A metal sound, sharp and sudden, echoing through the catwalk. I spun around, light trembling in my hand. The coats below were still. The gate was shut. No movement. But when I turned back toward the office door, it was slightly open. I was sure I had left it closed. I pushed it open with my flashlight. Inside, the air was even colder. The windows were fogged, though it wasn't nearly cold enough for that. My reflection in the glass looked pale and distorted. I whispered to myself, "You're tired. You're imagining things." Then, I heard it. Faint breathing. Not mine. It came from somewhere near the far corner of the office. I pointed the flashlight there, but the beam flickered. Once. Twice. Then went out completely. I stood in complete darkness. The breathing grew louder. Closer. slow and ragged, like someone struggling to inhale through a damaged throat. I bolted. I didn't care about the gate. I practically jumped down the stairs, nearly twisting my ankle. When I reached the bottom, I turned to look back up and froze. All 3 coats were hanging again. Perfectly still. Perfectly aligned. I didn't go near the catwalk again that night. The rest of my shift I spent locked in the lounge, eyes glued to the monitors. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the shadows, shapes shifting just out of the camera's reach. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps above me, faint and deliberate. By sunrise, my nerves were shot. When the morning crew arrived, I left without saying a word. I didn't even fill out my report. I just wanted out of that building. The next day, I asked to be reassigned. The supervisor didn't ask many questions. He just nodded, like he already knew. A few weeks later, I ran into another guard who had taken my old post. I asked him casually if he'd noticed anything strange. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You mean the coats?" That was all he said. He quit a month later. Even now, 15 years later, I can still remember the sound of that echoing staircase and the way that one coat swayed gently in the still air. I've worked dozens of sites since then. Office buildings, warehouses, schools. But no place ever felt like that one. Sometimes, when I walk past a dark hallway or see a row of hanging jackets, I feel that same chill run through me. I tell myself it was just exhaustion, stress, an overactive imagination. But deep down, I know what I saw. And somewhere, in that cold, empty factory, I know something was waiting for me. Something that didn't want to be seen. Something that still remembers me. The scratching at the door. I've never worked as a security guard, and I probably never will. But one night, I understood exactly what that kind of fear feels like. It happened years ago, when I was working the late shift at a small convenience store on the edge of town. It wasn't in a terrible neighborhood, but at night the streets got quiet. Too quiet. When the sun went down, the only lights came from our store sign and the dim orange glow of a few flickering street lamps. That night, it was just me and my manager, closing up after a long day. We locked the front door, flipped the open sign to closed, and started cleaning, wiping down the counters, restocking shelves, emptying trash. It was a routine we'd done dozens of times before. Around midnight, just as we were about to finish, we heard it. A sound at the front door. It was faint at first, a slow, deliberate scratching. We both froze for a second, glancing at the glass door. The store had automatic sliding doors that stayed locked after closing. Through the glass, all I could see was the reflection of our fluorescent lights and the dark street beyond. "Probably a raccoon," my manager said, half joking. I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. The scratching stopped after a few seconds, and we went back to work. But then, as I was mopping near the counter, I heard it again. This time at the back door. It was louder, sharper, faster. My manager was in the storage room doing inventory, and I could hear him curse under his breath. "What the hell?" he muttered as he walked to the door. Now, The back door of our store can't be opened from the outside. It's solid metal with no handle, just a lock on the inside. Nobody should have been able to touch it. Not unless they were already in the building. The scratching grew more violent. Whatever was on the other side was trying to get in. "Hey," my manager yelled, pounding on the metal. "Whoever you are, you'd better leave. I'm calling the cops." The sound stopped immediately. For a few seconds, everything was dead silent. Then, because he's either brave or stupid, maybe both, my manager unlatched the door and opened it just a crack, flashlight in hand. Nothing. No person, no animal. Just the empty alleyway behind the store, lit only by a single flickering light. But on the bottom half of the door, deep into the metal, there were claw marks. Real ones. 5 long scratches carved into the paint, like something with serious strength had been raking its claws across the steel. He came back inside, his face pale. "That wasn't an animal," he said quietly. I wanted to believe it was. Maybe a stray dog, maybe a large raccoon. Anything but what his voice was hinting at. We tried to laugh it off, tried to keep working. He went back to counting stock, and I was up front cleaning around the registers. But the silence between us grew heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us through the glass door. And then it happened again. The scratching. This time from the front. Loud, slow, right against the glass. I looked up and froze. There, pressed against the bottom of the door, was a hand. A human-shaped hand. But wrong. Too thin, too long. The fingers curved slightly, ending in what looked like black claws. Above it, 2 eyes glowed in the reflection of our lights. Not bright, just faintly reflective, like an animal's eyes caught in a beam. But they were set too high, too human. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. My manager stood beside me, gripping his phone, his face drained of color. Then he whispered, "Call the cops." I didn't argue. My hands shook as I dialed. The scratching stopped again before the police arrived. But we stayed exactly where we were, behind the counter. Eyes on that door, hearts pounding. The sirens finally broke the silence. 2 officers arrived and checked the building while we waited inside. One of them waved, signaling that we could come out. We locked up and followed them outside to the parking lot. The air was cold, and the wind carried that strange metallic smell you get after rain, even though it hadn't rained in days. One of the cops stayed behind to secure the building, while the other walked us to our cars. Just as we were about to drive off, the radio in his patrol car crackled. He leaned in to listen, then suddenly froze. "What is it?" my manager asked. The officer didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on something behind us. We turned. At the far end of the building, half hidden behind the corner, something was peeking out. A head. Human-shaped, but wrong. Tilted slightly too far to one side, skin pale and stretched, eyes glinting faintly in the darkness. It was watching us. The cop drew his flashlight and ran toward it. We followed with our headlights, but before he reached the corner, it was gone. He radioed for backup. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. They searched the entire area, checked behind dumpsters, alleys, rooftops. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. No stray animal tracks. But those claw marks on both doors were real. The police checked nearby security cameras from neighboring shops. Every one of them that pointed toward our store glitched during the time of the incident. The footage just cut out. Even the cop admitted he'd seen something. Those glowing eyes, that pale shape. He tried to explain it away, said it might have been a prank. Someone wearing a mask, maybe. But his voice didn't sound convinced. We all met again at a gas station a few blocks away after it was over. None of us said much. The cop promised he'd keep an eye on the area, but nothing ever came of it. No suspect, no evidence. Nothing. The next morning, I went back to work. The claw marks were still there, fresh and deep. My manager had covered them with duct tape, but you could still see the outline through it. We never talked about it again. And it never happened again. But even now, every time I hear a scratching sound, on a door, on a wall, even a tree branch brushing a window, I freeze. Because no matter how much I try to tell myself it was a prank, or an animal, or some trick of the light, deep down, I know better. Something was trying to get in that night. And whatever it wasn't human. The man who looked like me. I used to work the overnight shift at a dog daycare. We were cage-free, meaning the dogs could move around the rooms freely. So someone had to stay awake all night to make sure everything was fine. The place wasn't that big, just 3 playrooms, a small office, and a long hallway that led to the back door. Each room had a camera, and there were also cameras outside. One facing the front, one on the side, and one overlooking the parking lot. It was a lonely job, but I didn't mind it. The quiet hum of the air conditioning, the occasional bark, the glow of the monitors. It was peaceful most nights. Until that night. It was around 2:17 a.m. I remember because I had just written the time on my cleaning checklist. Everything was calm. The dogs were asleep. I was sitting in the office watching the security screens, half distracted, when I heard a loud buzz. It was the sound of the front alert, the one that tells us a client is at the door. Now, during the day, this sound goes off all the time. But in the middle of the night, never. My heart skipped a beat. I looked up at the monitor showing the parking lot. The camera was angled in such a way that you could see part of the driveway, the edge of the building, and where the back door should be. But not the door itself. That's when I saw him. A man was walking toward the back door, slowly, calmly, like he knew exactly where he was going. At first I thought maybe a coworker came back for something. But nobody else was scheduled that night. My boss was out of town, and the nearest house was half a mile away. For a few seconds I just stared at the screen, frozen. Then my stomach dropped as I realized I didn't remember locking the back door. I rushed to the hallway. My shoes squeaked against the floor as I hurried past the sleeping dogs. The security light flickered once as I reached the end of the hall. The back door was locked. I tugged on it just to be sure, solid. But then, scratching. Soft, slow, deliberate scratching right against the metal. It was coming from the other side. I whispered, "Hello?" Nothing. Then the sound stopped. I waited there for what felt like a full minute. Silence. I finally turned the handle again, still locked. I backed away and returned to the office, trying to calm myself. Maybe I imagined it, maybe it was the wind. but I needed to be sure. I rewound the camera footage about 30 seconds before the buzzer went off. There he was again, the man walking up toward the back door. But when I watched the next few seconds, something didn't make sense. He never came back. He didn't walk away. He didn't turn around. He just vanished. One moment he was there, his body mid-step, and in the next frame, gone. Completely gone. My hands started shaking. I rewound again and again, frame by frame. It made no sense. Then I froze the video on the clearest frame I could find, and my blood ran cold. The man was wearing my clothes. Same hoodie, same hat, same sneakers, same haircut. The same way I stood, slightly hunched, hands in my pockets. It looked like me. I leaned in close to the screen. The image was grainy, distorted, but everything about him matched me. The only thing I couldn't see was the face. The shadow covered it completely. But it was me. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the monitor. My mind was trying to find an explanation. Maybe it was old footage. Maybe the cameras glitched and replayed something from before.
But that couldn't be. I had checked that same camera an hour earlier. It was recording live. I went back to check the back door one more time. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of anyone outside. The only light came from the street lamp flickering across the parking lot. I stood there in the dark hallway, suddenly aware of every sound. The hum of the lights, the ticking of the clock, the soft breathing of the dogs. Everything felt off. For the rest of the shift, I couldn't take my eyes off the screens. Every flicker made my heart jump. Every sound made me turn. But nothing else happened. When morning came, I told my manager about it. He didn't believe me at first, until I showed him the footage. He leaned in, stared for a while, and then looked back at me. "Man," he said quietly, that's you." We checked the footage together again, frame by frame. The timestamp was correct. The motion sensors worked. The cameras had been recording continuously all night. And yet, there I was, walking up to the back door at 2:17 a.m., and then disappearing into thin air. We tried checking other angles, other times. Nothing. A few weeks later, the system was replaced with new cameras. The manager said it was because of technical issues, but I always wondered if he just didn't want to see something like that again. I still think about that night, about the man who looked like me, about where he came from. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm walking alone, I get this strange feeling, like I'm being watched, like he's still out there, somewhere, in the dark, walking toward another door. Mine.